everyone together. And it is a remarkable what one man, one group who have goodwill to bring all of us together, the impact that they make. I'd like also to want to thank the Ethiopian community, our leaders. Ato Samuel, thank you so much for your vision again. I want to also thank the Eritrean community, our brothers. Raise your hand. I just saw you. There you are. Thank you so much. It means a lot. And we want to also thank ESAT, Ethiopian Satellite Television, for their outstanding liaison in terms of what is happening here under the COVID environment. It is extremely important that our audience really truly is outside of this room, and ESAT is our ears, our eyes, to really to bring our effort to the world at large. So without further ado, today our guest is the candidate Steve House, a very good friend of our African community throughout, especially in the District 6. And he will be coming, I will be inviting him to the stage, and I will also invite today's moderator, Papa Dia. And I'm glad you're taking my place from 2 days ago, because I get to be a little bit long-winded, so maybe we can have a better, sharp conversation so that everybody will have a chance to ask questions later on. So without any further ado, I want to welcome Papa Dia, and please a round of applause for our distinguished guest, Mr. Steve House. Thank you.
Steve, you could have a seat. Thank you. Good evening. It's truly an honor to be here with you. Please, you can. So it's truly an honor to be here. And Deacon Youssef, thank you so much for that introduction. And as you know, I just want to spend some time to give you a little bit of rundown how this evening going to look like. This is not a debate. We are having a candidate forum. The first session will be engaging into a dialogue with candidate Steve House. And the moderator for that, actually, we have a wonderful young woman, a leader that I'll be introducing here on the stage to do that. And on the second part, we'll have Congressman Jason Crow that's going to be joining us around 6:30 this evening to join us. So the first part is with candidate Steve House, and the second part will have Congressman Jason Crow. But this is what I want to say. If you look around and look at the person that's sitting in front of you, behind you, probably is from a different country. And what do we want to showcase? We want to showcase when we come together as one, as unity, with that powerful voice, there's so much we can do. We know we have some of us that's been here for many years. I've been here for 20 years. We know we never had the opportunity to come together as one. For many years, we've been just working with the Ghanaian Association, for people that are from Ghana, people from Ethiopia, and that is okay. But now it's time that we open our arm to each other, our heart to one another, and get into this journey together. That's what this historical moment is about. The question is always, when you have an opportunity like this, what do you do about it? What are we going to do? Now we came together, we have elected officials and candidates that are willing to engage into a dialogue with us. What does it mean? And how are we going to use it? So what it means first is, we have about 40, 50 people, and we have a lot of other people that are following us online. It is your responsibility to go out there and educate and inform other people, to know that the historical moment that we have, which is the election on November 3rd, are extremely important. For those of us that can vote, we have to make it an obligation and a duty to register and cast your vote. I know as a community leader, I've heard a lot. Papa, I cannot have access to loan. Papa, my kids do not have access to good education. Papa, I cannot have access to home. Your time is now to address those things by casting your vote. And I tell everybody, as we stand here, we are not for the Democratic Party, no, we are for the Republican Party. We are for the best interest of our community. So when you go out there to cast your vote, think about what's best for us first. And now you can think about the party that you belong. Together, let's be aware of those issues that are challenging us. You go to DIA, the vast majority of those employees are from Africa. Are they being taken care of? Right now, we are facing this pandemic where we know the vast majority of immigrants from Africa are nurses. They are in the healthcare industry. Are they being taken care of? We know with this pandemic, all our small business owners has been hit. Do they still have access to the PPP loan or any lending? Those are the things that we need to think about. Those are the dialogue we want to engage with the candidate and the elected official. So my ask of everybody this evening, where you're sitting, you have a paper and a pen. Please write down your question. We'll come by and get them. And you will have the opportunity to ask your question directly. Because we need to know, if elected, what Mr. Steve House is going to do for our community. And that question to come from all of us, not just from me. Now, I would like to take this time to introduce our moderator. And when we came together as different communities, we wanted to make sure that every single voice is represented at the table. We know we came from a background where our women, they are wonderful and beautiful wife, and we leave them home. But here we wanted to make sure that our woman voice are heard. When we get into this conversation, the woman have a seat at the table. And we have Dr. N. Kiki, a powerful leader in the community, somebody that cares about education, somebody that cares about the improvement of our community, and you will get to hear that this evening with the interaction she's going to have with Steve House. Please help me welcome Dr. N. Kiki. Thank you. When we get into this conversation, the woman has a seat at the table.
Thank you so much, Papa. Good afternoon, brothers. Good afternoon, sisters. Good afternoon, fathers and mothers in the room. It is truly an honor to be standing before you today. This is a great day. And let me tell you why. Because as Papa said, coming from a background where women, despite their beauty, despite their educational background and their knowledge, are relegated to the back, this is truly awesome to be here. I am not only representing myself, but I am representing the great, proud, hardworking African immigrants, but most particularly my sisters, the African women. It is possible. We do have our place next to our brothers, next to our husbands, to also talk our wisdom to their ears in all humility. And that's what we are going to be doing today. Thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you for allowing me to talk to you. I am truly humbled. I am. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I want to tell you what I found out when I was told I will be chatting with candidate House. I went and did do a little bit of homework. I found out he is a Republican candidate. He has an extensive and successful career in healthcare, so he knows all about healthcare. So people, get your questions ready, right? He was at one point a businessman. He's a father, he's a husband, He's a grandparent. Yes. I found out he also chaired his party in 2015. He's also an active member of the Rotary Club. Yes, I did my homework. But what really attracted me was the fact that he really has a true and sincere heart for public service. Well, too much talking about him. The candidate is here. Let's hear from him himself. Let him introduce himself. Candidate Hausman, why don't you take 3 minutes and introduce yourself to the African community?
Thank you, Dr. Ann. I want to start by telling you a story from this January. I was in a school. It was called the Our Lady of Fatima School, and it was outside of Bahati, Kenya. And a little girl was waiting for me, and the principal of the school pointed to me, and she came running over to me. And she started to cry as she gave me a hug. And I looked down at her and I said, "Hi, my name is Steve." And she said, "Mr. House, I know who you are." She said, "You allowed me to go back to school this year." Because she'd been out of school for a year without a school uniform. And what touched me about the conversation so much was I said, "What are you going to do with your education?" And she said, "I'm a senior this year, and I've just been accepted to go to college and become an accountant." And I said, "Wow, that's amazing." I said, "How does being an accountant affect you and your family?" And she said, "I will be able to make the money to support my entire family as an accountant in Kenya." And that little girl's story for me is the same as the story I want to hear for every little girl and boy in America, in countries in Africa, and other places in the world. And I'm running for Congress because I think we have the potential for many more, if not everyone, to dream that way, to grow up that way, to come from safe neighborhoods, and maybe most importantly, to be part of families. Because here in America, the way it works here is if you're part of a family, if you're part of a good, close-knit family, you always seem to do better than others who are not. So it's so very important to me to protect our families, to make sure they have health care, to make sure they have safe neighborhoods, that they can go to a school that they're going to get educated on, that they can go to a place and get the health care they need to be quality, healthy people that they want to dream for, that there are no limitations placed on them because of the school or the zip code they happen to live in. So I'm running for Congress because I want the children of this country to dream the way I dreamed. I grew up on a farm. It was a small farm. We didn't make a lot of money, but it gave me just enough to be that kid that went to college. But I did so after God did something very special for me when I was 8 years old and very sick with a birth defect. I was fortunate enough to be able to get well. And that led me on a journey where I think today I'm more of a missionary than a politician. I have a mission to do the things that are right for the people in CD6, that are right for the children. It doesn't matter to me whether you're Democrat, Republican, Unity, unaffiliated, or Green Party. I will represent you in this district. And I will do it with a heart of a family man and with a foundation of spirituality from a God who saved my life. And that's why I'm here. And thank you, Dr. Ann, for being here with me.
Absolutely. Please take a seat. Okay, so if you don't mind, Candidate House, I'm going to let you know again, as Papa said, the format. I'm going to ask you some questions, and these are questions that derive from topic of interest from the community. And after that, there will be direct questions from the community, the audience here. How does that sound?
That sounds good, Dr. Ann, and please call me Steve because I'm going to work for these people. They're not working for me.
I love it. Okay. Okay, so let's start. The first topic I would like to start with is the one on immigration reform. Mm-hmm. So, with a lot of African immigrants in immigration jails, waiting to see the judge, and so many waiting for years to bring their loved ones over, and others facing deportation while their kids are U.S. born, actually, and knowing what the future of DACA holds, what immigration reform would you propose if elected?
That's a great question, and there's a bunch of things that need to be done. Number one, we have to make immigration easier to understand, shorter in duration, less expensive, less prone to fraud, because there are actually many people, as I've learned, that prey on immigrants who are trying to get into this country, and they end up spending way too much money. We've got to stop that as part of the process. For the folks who are here that you refer to as DACA or Dreamers, there's also folks who are here for TPS. I think if you're here in this country and you're a violent criminal, you need to go away. You need to be sent back or dealt with from a criminal justice perspective. But otherwise, I think for the DACA kids who are here, who spent their entire lives here, if they want to be citizens, I think they apply for citizenship just like everybody else. But they're already in the country. What we'd like to do is we'd like to see them potentially pay an annual fee because they're waiting to become citizens and they're in the country. But what's really important to me is that they have the opportunity to buy health insurance. Because I think if you're in this country and you don't have health insurance, and you end up going to the hospital, to the emergency room, because that's likely what happens in a lot of cases. You go to the emergency room because you don't have access to primary care. You're already very sick by the time you get there. So I'd like to see us solve the health insurance problem. I also think that we ought to have a guest worker program. There's many of the folks that are in the TPS programs that come from Central America, from African countries, from Asia, that want to come and work and go back and forth freely. I think if there's an opportunity for that they ought to have that, and it ought to be a worker program that doesn't require renewal as often, if they have a constant job, and if they don't have a job, they can be sponsored. There's ways to do that. The bottom line, it's too complicated, it's too costly, it takes too long, and there's too much fraud in our immigration reform, and it should have been fixed about 40 years ago.
Thank you so much. But I would like for you to expand a little bit more on your plan for DACA, because we do have a lot of DACA immigrants in our midst as well. So when you say you would like to extend health insurance for them, we're going to come to the health insurance part, but what exactly would be your plan to offer them that health insurance, and also how would you give them a working permit, for example, that will be helping them along the way?
I think let's start with your second question first, which is, if you declare yourself to be in the country with an intention to be a citizen and you begin the process, then you have to be identified with an identification card. You have to actually be in a place, because hiding is not helping them, it's not helping us. We have to deal with that. The health insurance plan is buying the same health insurance plan I might buy. Now, I have a new American healthcare plan that's going to reduce the cost of that substantially so that it is actually cost effective for them to do that. Most of them in the original group of Dreamers or DACA have reached the age where they're working, they've gotten through college and high school, and this is really important for them and their families. So I see them buying health insurance. We'll means test, the ability to pay a fee while you're waiting. If they want to go into the military, I think we ought to look at the military being a shortcut to, becoming citizens, because they're serving our country and they're putting their life at risk. I think college is another thing. I think if you can graduate from college, I think that's another step that we should look at in the immigration reform discussion as well.
Thank you so much. Still in the same light, with so many African seeking asylum and refugee status due to civil war in their countries or human rights violation, for example, could the U.S. be more open and welcoming to African people, and how? What do you think?
I don't think we've done a good job of identifying what a refugee is in America, partly because most of the refugees around the world are connected to continents that are not a long ways away from everyone else, right? So in North America, refugees come from Central and South America, from Mexico, occasionally from Canada, but refugees from Africa or Asia or some of the Middle East countries, it's much more difficult to get here. I think we need to define what a refugee program is, and we need to have a real refugee program in this country. Once we do that, I think for immigrants who are coming in from countries that are war-torn or civil wars are going on in a country in Africa, that they ought to have a way to get safety. I mean, I want my family to be safe. I want your family to be safe. I think the world itself needs to deal with refugees different as a whole.
Thank you so much for answering that. I want to move to another topic here. Let's talk about small businesses. You were a business owner at one point, so it is down your aisle. So the vast majority of African immigrants are business owners, as you know. And yet, having access to capital has been a major issue on top of the COVID-19. Are there resources you know of or resources you would propose to have easy access to capital if elected?
Yes, in fact, one of the bigger tragedies beyond the loss of life and the sickness that's gone on with COVID has been that we've lost 440,000 black-owned small businesses. And they don't define whether that's an immigrant-owned business or an African-American-owned business, but either way, the bulk of those businesses have gone out of business for lack of capital during the COVID crisis. I think we ought to do what I call a restart program, which is we know that business works when you have the experience and the capital to do your business. If you lack the experience and you have a lot of capital, you're probably going to throw your capital away and go out of business anyway. But if you got experience, which most of these businesses have had because they were going concerns, they were in business. I think as part of what we did with the stimulus package coming forward, we need to target those 440,000 businesses. There's something called the Platinum Plan that's been introduced. I like what's in the Platinum Plan because it focuses on the idea that we've got to restart black-owned businesses in this country specifically because there is so much value not only in getting a paycheck, but getting a paycheck from a business you're building equity in because you own that business. That's got to happen. Capital is the number one problem. Some of them, however, Dr. Ann, will not be able to start immediately. If you own a restaurant and dealing with what's going on with COVID, you probably shouldn't start immediately. But I do think that we need to look at who has the most need and the most opportunity and the most potential, and we've got to do restart programs in those small businesses.
I like what I hear. I'd like to remind everyone, please prepare your questions, get them ready, and Papa will help me send them up when the time is there. I'd like to move to another topic, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. Let's talk foreign policy. So, Africans feel that China is taking advantage of them economically. What could the U.S. involvement in the continent to build stronger partnership and collaboration on trade and economic growth between U.S. and African countries? What could the U.S. do about that?
So let's first start with the premise. America has not had as much influence in Africa as the former British or colonized countries have had in Africa. But there's great opportunity in Africa. I see countries like Ethiopia, for example, where, once the GERD is completed, the opportunity in Ethiopia as a country is going to skyrocket. And I think when that happens, you take a country that has defined borders, that has a unifying government, hopefully, and it has a group of people who have a common identity. I think you can build great things. American companies are now looking at an investment fund. There was a bunch of funds, and what President Trump did was he combined 3 of those funds into one. And that one fund, which I believe is called the Economic Development Corporation and Finance Fund, will then actually serve to fund companies who will do business in Africa. What has to happen, though, more than anything else, is we've got to get to the point where the U.S. ambassadors and the people we have on the ground in countries in Africa have deeper level relationships. It's not enough to have a relationship with the president of a country if you have a scenario where you have very important, powerful governors and civics leaders and religious leaders. Americans need to get to a deeper level of relationship with African nations and the people that live there to understand the local environment better. Because ultimately running a business, as you know, as I know, as many of the people in this room know, is a question of how much risk do I take? And the risk I take is going to depend a lot on how much I know about the local environment and my ability to do something. There's a lot of work going on in building infrastructure. Part of that's, like the dam in Ethiopia, it's 60% of the electrical, or the people that don't have electrical power, they'll get it. Building infrastructure across Africa is very important. I am very, very worried about how China has positioned itself. Because what China wants is power and control, and what America needs to do with Africa is partnership and prosperity. I think we're getting there, but this next 3 or 4 years are going to be critical to that.
Thank you. You mentioned the GERD. Let's talk about that. Well, the GERD is actually an agreement between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, right? So with U.S. involvement, what would be your view on this process?
You know, you have to go back to a little bit of the history, and I apologize to the Ethiopians in the room for insulting their intelligence, but if you go back to the control of water rights that existed when Britain had colonized both Egypt and Sudan, you know, you look at the Nile River basin and the Nile River itself, 82% of all the water comes sourced out of Ethiopia, but yet out of all the water that passes some 94 billion cubic meters of water in the Nile, only 1 billion cubic meters goes to Ethiopia itself. So there's a water problem because many of the what they call the downstream countries like Egypt and Sudan, those countries believe the colonial agreements still exist. The other countries on the upstream side, like Ethiopia and Tanzania, they think that those are no longer valid because those countries are not colonized by Britain anymore. The U.S. needs to help to facilitate water agreements between those countries, if at all possible. We live in the state of Colorado. Colorado, much like Ethiopia, all the water flows out of the state. Water agreements downstream in Arizona and California are very, very important, but you can't deny Colorado the right to live or exist. And Ethiopia needs to have the water rights to be able to prosper as a nation, and having 1 BCM of water out of 100 is just not enough for the country that sources 82% of that. So I'm hoping we can help facilitate water agreements because that will ultimately make a peaceful transition between those countries exist.
Indeed. Thank you so much. This is a conversation I can sit there and continue, but I'd like to give an opportunity to the audience to ask questions at this point. And if Papa,
Yes.
if we have some questions,
Yes,
please
thank you,
bring them
Dr.
up.
N. So yes, I'll be calling you to come and ask your question. What we ask is mention your name and go straight to your question so we have a chance to get everybody to ask their question. So the first question is coming from Adrian Matadi.
Thank you for giving me the floor. As Papa said, my name is Adrien Matadi, originally from the DRC, Congo. My question is going to be, I don't know if you will be able to answer this or you're going to take it, if elected, to Congress. This way you will debate this. As an African, what are ways or strategies you plan to implement, if in the Congress, about the U.S. involvement in Africa, particularly in the DRC Congo, where the armed force, rebel groups, and multinational companies that are backed by the U.S. government continue to commit human rights atrocities and to loot and basically destroying the new generation to come in the DRC Congo and in Africa, basically, and along making sure that human rights are guaranteed for everyone. What is your thought about this? Thank you.
It's a great question, and I think one of the things you have to think about helping Americans, if you're an African immigrant, is to understand the different democracies that exist in African countries. The Democratic Republic of Congo is clearly in a very difficult situation. There are human rights violations, and the United States in that situation should put pressure on the leadership to stop it. We can't invade a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo. That would be the wrong idea, but we certainly need to put pressure on the country and the country's leaders to stop human rights violations. Now, a country like the Gambia, for example, which is a brand new democracy, which doesn't even know how to hold a court system, America needs to help them build a democracy. It's a great idea. It's a wonderful experimental thing. But understanding the difference between what's happening in Guinea and Ivory Coast and what's happening in Ethiopia. The House Democracy Partnership visited Ethiopia last year, and they came back with a specific set of instructions about the democracy in Ethiopia. I think we have to do a much better job in Congress as American leaders in understanding the different democracy situations that exist in the various countries in Africa, because they are very different. Africa is a continent. It's the only place we seem to call a continent. We don't really say Europe. We say France, England, and things like that. I prefer calling it by country. So there are countries in Africa who have fledgling new democracies we need to support one way. There are existing democracies that are trying to have free and fair elections, which are difficult in a lot of places in Africa. And then there are countries that have human rights violations, and I think the American government should put significant pressure on those places to stop, because we believe people have the right to life here, and that they should have the same right to life everywhere in the world.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Next question is coming from Ikunda.
Thank you. My name is Ikunda Bureta. I'm original from Tanzania. My heart jumps when you mentioned Lake Victoria. Thank you. My question is about healthcare, and I'm glad that you've been there. Working healthcare right now at the moment, it's really difficult. I literally don't remember a day that we've never worked short, especially during the pandemic. We've been working so short. And we wish that if more people would be able to go to school and become nurses or nurse practitioners. But the problem falls on the grants or falls on the fact that people are scared if I go back to school, me included, what's gonna happen to my children as a single parent? Will I be able to work full-time and go to school full-time and at the same time taking care of my children? My answer comes no. So how can we get help for the people that are needed so much in our community as healthcare? That's number one. Number two, I have friends that are registered nurses. They would love to go and further their education. They want to get maybe the bachelor, or they want to be nurse practitioners. But they fall into the category that they make too much money. So they don't get any grants, so they're stuck where they are. So my question also will be, how do we help those people? I think that's it. Thank you.
That's a great question. It's really a two-part scenario. One is, how do we make education easier for people to obtain? And we have a problem with college education in this country, in part because we don't allow people to have work experience and enough credentials for that work experience to minimize the amount of time they need to be away from their families. Prior to the pandemic, we were in a situation where we had 7.5 million open jobs in the country. We were facing a point in our nation where we were going to have to start doing some extraordinary things to be able to recruit people, to change their careers, to do those things. Many of those ideas are still possible. Like, for example, I think there are going to be colleges where you can go to nursing school and they will help provide daycare for you because the industry needs it. There are partnerships that industry would like to do. Hospitals would like to do that with nurses. There are 8 nurses leaving the field today for every 3 that come in. I mean, we're running shorter and shorter and shorter. So there are programs, we can help make you aware of some of those programs regarding nursing specifically. But the general problem we have in this country right now is how we credential a college education and the cost of it and where kids start college after leaving high school are all problems that need to get resolved with new business models, new processes, and new ideas. Once we get through the pandemic, I think you'll see a lot of that start to happen because we're going to go back to work, more frequently. But you're absolutely right. We need more nurses. We are losing nurses by the day. Nurses are just not available the way they need to be. And then nurse practitioners and assistants and PAs and all the other things we need in the nursing categories to help us get through. But we've got to also change healthcare to make that more possible. And that's part of what we're going to do with our healthcare plan.
Thank you. Next question is coming from Rashid.
Good evening. My name is Rashid Sadiq from African community, immigrant. My question is, we have a lot of problem for the police, and there is a cultural barrier and language barrier. How you educate the police and how you mediate police and immigrant community?
I think what he was asking was, how do you educate the police on the cultural differences in the community?
Correct.
One of the things that Dr. Ann and I talked about beforehand was my belief that a big part of what we have to do with police reform is we have to educate police on ethnicity, culture, gender, lifestyle. And what happens most often with police departments are police officers come in, they go to an academy, and they get trained on lots of basic things for police work, but it's expensive to do the rest. So as we talk about doing police reform, I'm not in favor of defunding the police. I think what we have to do is add resources to add additional training. Because without that additional training, an officer can encounter a situation where they don't even understand what you just said, let alone you don't have the ability to communicate with them. And I think we have to reform our police with much more training than we have today to be able to equip them that way. The bulk of them want the training. They want to be better at their jobs just like the rest of us do. And I think that we can get there through that process, but we need to take some action pretty quickly. I don't think this is one of those things where we can wait until next year at this time. We need to start having the plans at the federal and the state level. A lot of what happens with police happens in local community organizations, not at the federal level. But I think there needs to be federal incentive to make local police departments more effective at what they do, better trained at what they do. We saw in Lakewood, Colorado, there was a period of time where you had to have a bachelor's degree in criminology to be able to be a police officer, and we saw significant changes. The other thing we have in the police departments in this state is we have data systems. A system called StatCom is in many of the police departments. It tells us which officers are arresting more people in different neighborhoods or maybe arresting less people of a certain category. Those data systems can help us figure out who needs the training. And lastly, the one thing we cannot tolerate is we cannot tolerate an officer who clearly displays racial tendencies or gender-specific tendencies, and they are going to be terminated by the police department, and then the civil service union forces them back on the force. How do I know that happens? I've talked to police chief, and they tell me that happens on a regular basis. I don't want to blame anybody. We just need to solve that specific problem, because if we don't, America will continue to have the cultural problems we have in it, not just for immigrants, but for everybody else as well.
Well said on that. Thank you. Any more questions, Papa?
Hello, my name is Rebecca Awit. I work at South High School. I'm an assistant teacher. My question is about kid going back to school. So it's my concern, like, is a good idea for the kid to go back to school? It's gonna be safe for them, because a lot of parents, they're asking those questions all the time, like, is our kid, they're gonna be okay? Or it's gonna be safe for them, especially what is going on now, pandemic. And I wanted to ask Mr. Congress, as an immigrant student in the state of Colorado, you think when you go in the office, it's going to be more opportunity for scholarship for those students of the immigrant? Thank you.
So I'm not sure I understood the question. Did you understand it, Ann?
Yes, the bottom line of the question is, how can we help immigrants with scholarships and in education?
Thank you, Rebecca. The American collegiate system has something called a Fulbright scholarship and a few other things for immigrant students to be able to obtain college educations. I think we have to treat immigrants to this country the same way we treat anyone else. I mean, there's opportunity. We need more engineers. We need more college degree nurses. We need more doctors. We need more lawyers. Well, maybe we don't need more lawyers. I'm sorry about that, but we need highly educated people in this country. And I think what we need is we have an educational system that supports that. So I think people need to be assessed based on their need, their opportunity. I think we need to look at college degrees, and we need to assess the value of the degree. Whether it's an immigrant who's trying to get it, or a naturalized or citizen born in America, we have to treat people for what they want in their life, for the dream they have, because they're here in America, and America's a place you can dream. And I think we have to make that available to them.
Thank you. Any other question?
Yes, my name is Isaac. I'm originally from Ethiopia. And my question is, if and when a COVID vaccine is available in the near future, hopefully, what would you do to make sure that our community gets its fair share of it on a timely manner? This applies to us here in this community. Thank you.
Yeah, the COVID vaccine will almost certainly be given to people who have the greatest risk first, right? So how do you determine the greatest risk? One of the things we did wrong, in my opinion, in dealing with COVID-19 was, in the state of Colorado, we have health information exchanges, which are databases that contain records, medical records, for over 5 million people that live in the state of Colorado. our first step should have been to go to those databases and say, who are the people that are over 60 years of age, that have one or more morbidities like COPD, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and we need to let them know privately, because of HIPAA, privately let them know that they should stay home for the next month or two until we get this figured out, because at first we didn't have a lot of knowledge about it. Now you have to factor in that there's another factor, which is people with black and brown skin have suffered a greater risk with COVID-19 because of immunity levels, neighborhoods, economic, food deserts, things that are bigger problems as well. So I think we have to overlay that with where you live and what access you have to both healthcare and quality food to determine who has the risk. Those are the people that need to get it first. I'm not one of them. It's people that are in that category that need to get it. I think from a manufacturing point of view, for people in Ethiopia, I think ultimately, the United States is not going to just take all the vaccines. I think there's going to be a worldwide distribution of vaccines. There are multiple vaccines that are going to be used. The Russians claim to have one. There's some coming from Israel and other countries. I think Ethiopia will get its fair share of vaccines, and they should dole it out exactly the same way I just prescribed for the United States of America.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to remind everyone to keep coming with your questions, and if we cannot answer them all, we will make sure that Congressman and his team get those questions and have them answered. So make sure you put your name and an email address where we can get back to you.
Thank you for your time, first of all. My name is Patrick. I'm from Cameroon. My question has two parts. And first of all, I want to give you a quick background. I have a 3-year-old son, and his future in this country with everything going on worries me a lot. So my question is this: do you think the Second Amendment should be repealed? If not, do you think there should be any new gun restrictions to deal with what feels like an epidemic of mass shooting? Thank you.
So, Patrick, I worry about what's going on in this country, too. A man was shot in downtown Denver yesterday by another man who didn't know him, had never done any business with him. It was simply they were wearing the different colored hats or something, and they were shot. And I think that's a horrible scenario. I think the American people ought to have the right to look at the Second Amendment. I don't think you should make a change to a constitutional amendment, not here or anywhere in the world in a constitution, without the American people themselves having a vote to decide what to do with that. But the big problem we have in this country right now is if you look at the FBI data on the subject, if you look at other things that have been done research-wise, and quite frankly, we haven't done enough research on gun violence in this country yet, is you've got to start to build mental health resources to help people before they ever get to the point of shooting someone. There's lots and lots of lawful gun owners in this country who like shooting targets or going hunting. Before we deprive them of a right, let's make sure we solve the real problem as well. I also think there ought to be a lot more debate about it. I think we need to talk about it. We need to have conversations today versus the ones that are in the minds of Ethiopians and South Sudanese and Tanzanians, that those water agreements should serve their countries and not be tied back to that colonial time. It doesn't really have anything to do with the U.S. It's just that the U.S. never colonized any of those countries in Africa, so we didn't have any agreements. We weren't part of any agreements. Does that make sense?
Sure, I'll take it.
Yeah, so it was just the British colonization of those countries and what they did.
Okay.
On the question of Republicans and establishments in this country, I can tell you right now as a Republican, I've learned a lot in the last 5 years about how this country really works. And I've taught a lot about how this country really works to Republicans. And I think Republicans need to get it. One of the biggest injustices in my mind that exists in this country today, besides the killing of people who shouldn't be killed, AKA Elijah McClain, is the fact that today the net worth of a black family in America is $19,100. The net worth of an Asian or a white family is $171,000. There was a series of things that happened from the time people were put on boats in Ghana against their will to this very day that created that injustice. Homeownership, the Homestead Act, the GI Bill, back to Washington, who do absolutely nothing about it. We're going to have this problem a lot longer, and I think we need to change that. And I think voters like you and everybody else should say, if my guy didn't get enough done, replace him with somebody else. If that guy didn't get enough done, replace him with somebody else. And eventually, Congress will address the issues of injustice that live in this country and injustices that live in my heart that I know about. So that's why I'm running as a Republican, but I also believe that I will be able to support everybody, regardless of what political party affiliation or color you are, because I go for the problem, look for the problem, understand why you believe what you believe, and want to make sure I get it before I put out a solution.
Well, I really appreciate that answer. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
And I just want to leave you with something to consider, and that's the fact that, black people, eventually is too damn long. So we need to speed things up with regard to democracy. I just really want you to hear that. I feel that I'm representing a lot of people because I'm saying exactly what I've heard. So just want you to take that with you.
I just add to that. I think that's well said. I had a conversation yesterday with the head of the NAACP in Aurora, and I asked him the question because I'm a member of the NAACP in Aurora, and I'm passionate about it. And I said, we need to set some metrics. We need to see changes in income and wealth and educational levels. We need to see changes in safety and arrest records and things like that exist. We need to see changes in prison reform and recovery. So as an NAACP member, I asked him to sit down with me and set up some things that we can actually achieve in the short run, because that's the only way we're going to know whether or not we're making progress.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for answering those questions. Again, I just want to remind the audience, and I want to remind those that are following online, to keep your questions coming, and we are going to make sure that they go to Steve's team to get them answered. Make sure you put your name and an email address where they can reach out to you. On that note, Steve, would you please give us your closing remark?
Yes, and I'll make it reasonably short, given the time. I'm not perfect. But the one thing I am is committed. I'm committed to the truth. I'm committed to figuring out what the truth really is. I'm committed to humanity. I am tired of living in a country where people are dehumanized. And we've got to rehumanize each other. We've got to do it in churches, in schools, in public, in our communities. We've got to realize that the person standing next to me that I don't know, who's wearing a different colored hat, isn't my enemy. This is America. That's the way we have to do it. And in the process, America has been greatly enhanced by having relationships with countries in other places like Africa. I'm passionate about going back to Africa. It sort of draws you in. Quite frankly, I can't figure out why all of you are here and you're not back there, to be honest with you, because it's so great in the places I've been. But the reality of it is we need to have a free, fair, prosperous opportunity in front of everybody who lives in every country in this world. Some of them America will take a role in, some we will not. But the reality of it is I'm committed to being honest with you. I'm committed to be there. I want to know you. I want to know your families better because you're leaders in the community and you have access to other people who need our help. I'll return phone calls. I'll return emails. My office will be open and we're going to serve you because service is what I care about. It's really what I care about. And I care about people a whole bunch. So I hope you give me some consideration on November 3rd. I think it's time to move forward and take some action on things like healthcare, education, immigration reform, the climate. Those are the things I'm committed to, and I will make sure we take action as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve, for your time. Thank you for spending this time with us. I am sure grateful, and I know my people are as well. And at this point, we are going to close this session by calling my brother, Samuel Michael, for the closing remark for this session. Thank you. It was such an honor. Thank you.
On behalf of the Ethiopian American Civil Council, African Leadership Group, ISAT, Colorado Ethiopian Community, and the Eritrean community, we would like to thank the Hyatt Regency Hotel for hosting this event. We would like to thank our amazing sponsors, Jumbo Motors, and then Lucy Coffee, Qualimage for supporting this forum. We could not have done this without you guys. Steve House, we thank you for your participation tonight and then for your willingness to run for this important office. And then good luck. And thank you, community members, for coming out to voice our concerns and ask questions. If your questions did not get answered, please leave them with us. We will make sure to send them to campaign team for answers. And then remember to vote and take a friend with you. Now it is time for 5 minutes of group photos. We would like to take a group pictures with Steve House. Then after like 3 or 4 pictures with the audience, with Steve House, we will back to our seat like 6:45. Please take your seat around like 6:45. Prepare for the next speaker, Congressman Jason Crow. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate you. And then the other things, what I just want to remember, you continuing your practicing your social distancing, and then don't forget to keep your, face mask always. Thank you, guys.
You ask your question next. I will.
I'd like to take a picture of the ATM.
Okay. Why not get closer? We're the Asian community. Hey, how are you?
Thank you, Papa,
For what?
for everything. For everything that you do. You have no idea.
We're all doing it. Elevate the community. Guys, elevate the community.
Go on that side. Hold on, brother.
Thank you,
Thank
Jamal.
you. Where's the
Now, I don't know where this
Where's
picture
it
is
going?
going.
That's what I'm asking. That's what I just asked. Where's the picture going?
Good evening again. We're now in our final session with our distinguished guest, the Honorable Congressman Jason Crow. I want to make one simple remark, and particularly about this forum. This is not a one-time event that we plan to have. We're going to actually reach out to every member of the African diaspora in the future, and hopefully by then COVID hopefully will be behind us, so we can have a larger crowd for everyone to have the say. So we look forward in really reaching out to those who are not present here with us, to join us in the future to make sure that our voice is heard. You are part of a history. It turns out to be that this is the first African Forum event in the United States. So every one of you should feel immensely proud of being part of a major accomplishment, us as an African immigrants, and thank you again from the bottom of my heart. I want to just say a couple of things about the Honorable Congressman Jason Crow. I am extremely honored to introduce him as a friend of our community, African community. One of the things that I truly have been impressed by is his genuine interest to go where he is needed the most. He has not been shied away from having to respond to the calls that we make for so many things. I know in my case, in a couple of a major event of some human rights violation that took place in our land, when we reached out, he was the first one to respond. He was not only voiced a much needed voice to lend us what we needed in Congress by standing on the floor and speak in the interest of our country, but also, yes, thank you, and also being with us on the rallies and a couple of cold days where he lent his much needed voice that we needed to hear from. I want to thank you for that. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have said that I have known you, and thank you for being true to your words. We appreciate that. So I don't want to take up any more time. I want to introduce our moderator, Papa Dia, and in his good hand, our guest, the Honorable Congressman Jason Crow.
Thank you so much, Deacon. And good evening again. Thank you all for being here this evening. And as Deacon Youssef mentioned, we have the great honor and pleasure to have a friend of the community. And everything that Deacon mentioned took it from my mouth, because that's the same exact way I feel about our friendship and relationship. So we want to welcome you, and please have a seat, and we'll dive deep into the conversation. So,
is this working? Thank you. Thank you, Deacon, for the introduction. But I will say one thing. When you said that it's been great to have known you, I'm still alive and I'm right here. So you can still say it's good to know me. But thank you, my friend, for that wonderful introduction.
Yes, thank you so much, Congressman. So it's always difficult when you have to introduce somebody where the bio is like a book. So you've done so much, from being in the Army, being a lawyer, now being in Congress. So I would like to really allow you to take this time to introduce yourself and give us some of the things that maybe we did not get to know about you, And most importantly, let us know, since you've been in Congress, what have the things that you've seen and witnessed and the work you've been doing in Washington?
Thank you, Papa. And first off, I'm going to thank you for hosting this forum. I have to say that I really, really miss seeing you all in person and doing these events. I know we're all doing what we have to do during this challenging time to be safe for our families and our community and our businesses, but it's really great to see you, and I'm glad that the African Leadership Group, and the Ethiopian American Civic Council, and the Eritrean community, and all the leaders in this room have come together to do this event, so thank you for the opportunity. You know, the bios are funny, right? Because sometimes those are created by people who want to just look at a resume and schools and the accomplishments and the awards. But really, the things that you need to know about me are this. I come from a working class background. I was raised in a family mainly of a lot of construction workers. My grandfather was a bricklayer. I worked in construction myself to help put my way through college. I know what it's like to not know where your rent is coming from. I know what it's like to get dirty and sweaty and be the type of person that takes a shower at the end of the day instead of the beginning of the day. Then I stepped up to serve our country. My military career started as a private, then I became an officer, and I was proud to serve our nation as an Army Ranger in 3 combat tours. Then I became a veterans advocate to fight for my fellow veterans. Then I became a father. And it's that lens that's really the most important, because I know many of you are family people too. And what you do every day, Papa, I know you know this, we've talked about it, and I know this is the most important lens for you too. What we do when we get up every morning and we go to work and we build businesses, try to buy homes, we do it for our kids and for our grandkids. And that explains most of what I do and why I do it. Those are the things that are important for you to know about me, and those are the things about my bio that I'm most proud of. And now I'm a member of Congress, and I'm doing this because I love our nation, I love our community, but we have challenges that we need to accomplish together. No one person is going to solve this stuff. And I look forward to working with you to address our challenges.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And as you know, as a community, we have prepared some topic that's relevant to some of the issue and challenges that we are facing. And I'll be asking you questions based on this topic. But also, just want to remind the audience, please, you will have the opportunity also to ask your question in person. Please write it down and make sure you put your name and email. Jumbo and Dr. Ann will be collecting them, and at the end, you will get a chance to ask your question in person. But Congressman Crow, I took the luxury to start our conversation with this. We had a tragedy that occurred in our community with the arson fire of the Joel family. And when it happened, you took the phone and you called and you asked, Papa, how can I help? And you went even further. You went all the way to Washington on the Congress House floor and to do a testimony where you are standing with the Joel's family. Take us through that process and take us through what was the reaction of the fellow congressmen when you share with them the tragedy that happened here in our home and house in the Denver metro area.
Thanks, Papa. And first off, my heart still breaks for this terrible tragedy and to the family and for the Senegalese community and to the African community. You know, I have a couple of really important jobs. So people think of a member of Congress in the traditional sense, right? They think about the votes that you take, the laws that you sponsor, the speeches that you make. But there's other important parts of the job too. One of those, and not many of these get headlines, right? You don't see these in the front page of the Denver Post or the Washington Post, but they're sometimes the most important things that we do. One is constituent services, right? If you or someone in the community is having a hard time with the federal government or even a local government that we have a relationship with, we can oftentimes help you. Not all the time, but we'll certainly try. And the second is just my role as a community leader and what that means. And I take an expansive view of that role. I think that what I say and what I do matters. right? Because it sets an example, it sets a tone for the community. Whether I am silent in the face of abuses or challenges, when the community comes under assault, and if I weren't to say anything, that sends a message too. Or when I stand up and I do push back, that sends a message. So the tone that I set and what I communicate on is really important. So on this issue, obviously this has sent shockwaves to the community. You know, and if I'm sitting here as a parent and I'm wondering about the safety of my children, I'm wondering, is this a hate crime? Is it motivated because of the anti-immigrant and refugee rhetoric that's on the increase in our nation? And we don't have those answers. But what's important is that there's communication with all of you. And if you're not hearing from local leaders, if you're not hearing from law enforcement, if they're not communicating to you as a community, then that's in part my responsibility to make sure it happens. And I'm not a mayor, and I'm not a police chief, but I have them on my phone. And I can call them and I can say, hey, the community has not heard from you. The community is afraid. The community is not getting answers, and it's time that they start getting those answers. So that's why we made the calls and I made those connections. When I gave that speech on the House floor, a lot of eyes came towards me as I talked about the importance of our community. Right? I talked about the idea that we are a nation and we are a community of immigrants. Because there's this notion out there that comes from some people that immigrants and refugees are in some way a weakness, that there's in some way a burden. But I know that the opposite is true. That we are strong and we are vibrant and we are who we are at our core because we are a community of immigrants and refugees. And I will never stop talking about that. Whether it be in the context of the arson in this crime or any other context, I will never be quiet when it comes to those issues. So on this issue, yes, I will fight for you and I will make sure that you're getting the communication and you're getting the connections that you need. And on the next issue, I will do the same.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And the community and the Joel family appreciate that, and they really, really thank you for that. Now, on the same tone, we'll be talking about social justice and police reform, Black Lives Matters. 2020 has just been one of those years, so I'm counting the months we have left and can't wait for...
It's going slow, isn't it?
It's going very, very, very slow.
It's been a long year.
Now, with everything that we witnessed, the protests, the police brutality, could you share with the community what is your take on all these things, and what would you propose to make these things better so we can come together as one country? Because right now we feel we are extremely divided as a nation.
Yeah, we are divided as a nation, and this is one of the most pressing challenges that we face as a community, as a nation. First off, you should expect that all of your elected officials and all of your leaders will come out and say that Black lives matter, right? Those words matter. They are important to say because for so long they weren't said. Secondly, you should expect very concrete action. The time for talk and platitudes is over, right? Because the abuses that we saw, the murder of George Floyd that we saw in such vivid detail on video is not new, right? It's been happening for a very, very long time. And it happens to a lot of people. And it's just because it doesn't get caught on video doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And we have a deep-seated challenge in our community, in our country, that we have to have an honest conversation around. So I've been telling people all the time, you always have my thoughts and prayers. I'm a man of faith, and you'll always have my prayers, and you'll always have my thoughts. But I am not your minister or your pastor, and I'm not your philosopher. You didn't elect me to just give you your thoughts and prayers. I am your lawmaker. And my job is to make laws and to make policies that will make life better in our nation and our community. So I've taken action, and this is what I've done. After the death of Elijah McClain, I reached out to his mother, Mrs. McClain, and we had a conversation about what she would like to see come out of that. And I started a process to develop legislation that would address it. And that bill was going to be called the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, LETIA. Then George Floyd was murdered, and I made a decision that it wasn't just my role alone to lead on this reform bill. This was an opportunity for us to raise voices and raise people up whose voices have not been heard. And that I shouldn't be the face of that effort. So I reached out to Sheila Jackson Lee in Houston, who represents the family of George Floyd. I reached out to Ilhan Omar in Minneapolis, who represents the district where George Floyd was murdered. And I reached out to Karen Bass, who's the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and also on the Foreign Affairs Committee, like many of you know. And together, the four of us, we renamed the bill the George Floyd Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act. And we advocated, we pushed hard, and we got that bill included in the Justice and Policing Act, which passed the House with my vote and co-sponsorship earlier this year. And it's now sitting in the Senate for a vote. My bill would do 7 main things, but the most important are is it would increase accountability standards for our law enforcement. It would increase training. It would increase the manner in which we recruit our departments, because one of the biggest challenges that we have is many times our departments don't come from the communities they serve. They don't reflect the communities they serve. And we know that we get very different outcomes when our officers come from and look like the communities that they are policing. And it would create pilot projects to help make that happen. And it would do several other things that are important. It would take concrete action. The time for talk is over, and the time for real action and reform has arrived.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And we sure do need action. That leads me to my next question, which is related to immigration. And I am sharing fact with you. As we sit here to have this conversation, we have so many African immigrants sitting in the immigration jail for years that haven't been able to see the judge. We have so many of them seeking asylum and refugee status that's been in refugee camp for years. And we have so many of them that are here facing deportation, but yet they have US-born children, citizens, can't do nothing. What can you do at the Congress level to address an immigration reform that won't be passed from government to government?
Well, one of the most important things we need to do is stop retreating from the world. We have to stop, you can clap for that. We have to stop pretending that we can build walls and isolate ourselves from the world. Because our destiny and the destiny of our children is tied to what happens in Africa and in the Middle East and in Central and South America. It's important that we engage, and it's important that we have a presence on the world stage. We cannot retreat and isolate ourselves. But in a very concrete way, what the Congress can do with regard to the refugee crisis is it's time for the Congress to take back some of its power. The checks and balances have got out of whack, right? We have given up, Congress, over many decades, much of our power over immigrant and refugee issues to the executive branch. And now you see a president who's vastly cutting our refugee numbers at a time when we should be saying, let's stand up and let's engage with the world and let's welcome refugees who, as we've seen here, are a critical and important part of our community. We're shutting them out. So what the Congress can do is it can retake that authority under the INA, the law that gave that authority to the president. We can take it back. And we could say, we as the United States Congress, we're going to set the refugee limits. And I've signed on a bill that say that we have to set a floor of 90,000. And we're in, maybe we take more than that. Maybe we hit that floor some years, but we have to make sure that we're reaching out and embracing those who are trying to build a better life here. That's a really important thing we can do. And then in addition to that, we need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to make sure we're supporting our State Department and our immigration offices around the world, because as you know, and as many people in the community know, we've radically cut funding, not we as Congress, but this administration, in support for our immigration offices and embassies around the world. And so many of your family members can't even go in and find the support they need and apply for visas because they're shutting the offices down. That's the wrong answer. So we have to make sure we're conducting that oversight and we're recapturing that authority so that as the people's house, we can set policies that are more reflective of the values of our community.
So right now, just a follow-up question. What is the feature of an immigration reform that's been mentioned for years with this current administration?
What was the first part of the question?
What is the feature of the immigration reform that's been mentioned many years with this current administration?
Of my proposal, of the administration's proposal?
The administration proposal.
Yeah, well, they want to cut refugee numbers drastically. Right, we're at a mini-year low in terms of the number of refugees. First of all, secondly, they're trying to cut the diversity visa program. Right, they don't believe that helping families come together and reunite with families is an important priority of our nation. Me, as a father and as a family person, believes the opposite. I happen to believe that you shouldn't just give visas based on how much money you have in your bank account or just whether or not you have the ability to start a business, but that unifying families is good for the country and community as well. When you bring families together, everybody wins, right? The grandparents, the parents, the children. It's good for society to have families together. And that's a critical component of what they're trying to cut. I believe it's important that we even preserve that, we even expand it, so we can reduce the wait times. Right? It's not okay for people to be waiting 5, 10, 15 years with no certainty to whether or not they're actually going to be able to reunite their family.
Yes, yes. Thank you. And we will transition to foreign policy. For Ethiopian American, this election means GERD, Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam Agreement between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. With U.S. involvement, what would be your view on this process?
Well, first off, I mean, this is a tinderbox of a situation. We know that. We know that Ethiopia has established a no-fly zone over the dam itself, that they're very concerned about a military conflict coming out of this between Egypt and Ethiopia. I share that concern. We have influence and leverage with Ethiopia that almost nobody has, with Egypt that almost nobody has. Egypt will listen to the United States, and we are in a position of de-escalation. We can, if the United States steps up as an honest broker, we can make sure that this avoids military conflict and that we resolve this in a peaceful, amicable way. Obviously, the negotiations earlier through the African Union failed. So if we're not able to restart negotiations to the African Union, then I think the United States should intercede, and I actually wrote a letter asking that happen. I think Secretary Mnuchin should step up with the authority of the President and with the consent of the Congress in an attempt to resolve this problem so that it certainly doesn't resort to military conflict, but secondly, to economic conflict as well between the parties, because we don't want to see an economic trade war break out between African nations either. So that's really important, but right now, we avoided one of the worst possible consequences just about a month or two ago because the administration was going to suspend humanitarian aid to Ethiopia, which obviously would have put us in a very bad situation and made it impossible for us to broker a deal. So I, along with several other members of Congress, sent a letter to Secretary Pompeo and others saying that now is not the time to do that. Really, never is the time to do that, but certainly not now because that's not going to solve the issue. So not making the situation worse, but stepping up as an honest broker is really important right now.
Thank you. And just want to remind the audience, we'll be getting to your question here shortly. Just get with Jambo, Dr. N, to write your question. Now, still in foreign policy, in Africa lately, there's been a new wave of sitting president trying to make a third-term presidency going against the constitution.
That hasn't just been happening in Africa, Papa.
So Ivory Coast is a country that the current president, and Guinea is trying to do the same thing. What could be the U.S. involvement in process like this where presidents are abusing from their power to break the law and go against the Constitution?
Well, I think this goes to my earlier point that U.S. leadership and U.S. involvement matters. Right? When the State Department isn't properly funded, and this administration has attempted to slash funding for the State Department and humanitarian programs by as much as 30%. When we have hundreds of vacancies within the State Department actually vacant right now, when our diplomatic positions aren't even filled, and we don't even have the diplomats in place in our embassies, it makes it very, very hard for us to engage because we don't have the money, we don't have the resources, we don't have the personnel. So we have to stop shortcutting, shortchanging the State Department, which has a very important role to play in being our emissary and being a representative, certainly in Africa, but throughout the world. Secondly, it is important that we hold countries accountable for democratic principles because, when we lead by example and when we help uphold the example of democracy and human rights, we know that that raises the bar for everybody. So setting that example is really important. That's why it's really important that we have elections and we reaffirm our own rule of law and our commitment to democratic institutions here at home, because it sends a very strong message. And when we send the opposite message, when we have a president who favors and supports dictators and strongmen, then that allows those people to do those things unchecked. So we have to turn that around, and we have to first affirm our own principles and commitment to democracy and rule of law within the U.S., and then make the effort to do so abroad as well.
Thank you. Let's transition to small business, and I still want to make sure we have time for question. The vast majority of African immigrants are business owners, but yet having access to capital has been a major issue on top of COVID-19. Are there resources you know of or you would propose in Congress to allow African immigrants to have easy access to capital if re-elected?
Yeah, well, the thing that we've been working on right now is trying to get the PPP money, of which some of you might have used. We're trying to get that to truly the smallest, most vulnerable businesses. So we're trying to negotiate a way that would, we can't direct funding to specific groups based on race and religion. That's not permissible. But what we can do is direct funding based on need and based on vulnerability. So we're trying to figure out how do we revise this program to get it to the businesses of 10 or fewer employees, to restaurants, to the hotel, restaurant, and tourism industries that have been very impacted by the pandemic. So that's the immediate challenge, but we need actually a stimulus bill to do that. Right? We need a fifth round of stimulus funding to accomplish that and get that immediate aid in place. More long-term, once we're able to address the immediate crisis, I'm working on a bill right now with the Senate that we're looking at calling the 21st Century Entrepreneurship Core Act. And this is what that bill would do. What we know is that it's not just enough to have job training programs, that we need business ownership. We need to increase business ownership and capital investment within underserved communities. So how do we do that? one of the biggest challenges is the pipeline, right? Getting somebody from the starting point to the finishing point, getting them the training, the mentorship, and the capital investment that's needed. So what this bill would do is actually create a core where we select 1,200 entrepreneurs around the country, spread out between congressional districts in different states, and we provide them economic support, job training, mentoring, financial support, and we do a wraparound. We provide them wraparound services to help them start their business, and then we support them after they do, until they are self-sufficient. So this could be a game changer for many communities that have that challenge from the starting point, because it's not just enough to say, if you have a business, we'll give you a loan, if you never even get there to begin with. So we're trying to put together a program that would be wraparound and help people from the earliest point of that venture onward.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And we're getting ready for question, and I will ask the last question. We've been hearing a lot about the U.S. trade war with China, and now Africans feel like China is taking advantage of them economically. How do you see the U.S. involvement in more trade with countries from Africa?
I think this is a tremendous opportunity. First off, our trade war with China has not worked. It just hasn't. And so many businesses, particularly our exporting businesses, and American agriculture has been in the losing end of that. But China has been very aggressive about this, as we all know, right? With the Belt and Road Initiative, with their smart cities initiatives, their investments. Those loans and those infrastructure projects come with a hefty price tag, right? And what they're trying to do is invest, and they're trying to capture people economically within Africa. And that's what they're trying to do. They're not doing that out of the good of their heart, right? They're not building harbors and roads and bridges because they feel great about it. Yeah. They're trying to capture people economically. So what we need to do is we need to engage and counteract that. And Africa, the opportunity there is much of the continent is under 30. Yep. The youth and the talent in Africa has a ton of potential in terms of businesses and entrepreneurships and startups. And if we were to have better trade relationships and promote business investment and business relationships, both at the state level between Colorado and various nations, but at the federal level as well, we're setting ourselves up for success in the United States, but in Africa too, because a stable, prosperous, peaceful Africa is good for the world, and it's good for the United States. And we can also benefit economically from it. And then secondarily, I referenced the Smart Cities or Safe Cities initiative. We have to be very careful in making sure that African nations that are having this investment, and for those of you who haven't been tracking this, Africa is building out surveillance and monitoring systems and camera systems in some African countries, and they come in and they build these systems for free with the deal that they get to keep all the data. Yep. Well, what they're doing with that data is they're monitoring and they're building out massive amounts of big data for qualitative analysis. Yeah. Yep. That's very scary stuff, right? Because what are they going to do with that data? Once they have it, it's theirs. Yep. And then you lose your privacy. You can lose your democratic rights. So we have to make sure we're working with African nations right now so that they understand what's happening, and we help counteract that so we're not, so that they are not getting themselves in a long-term difficult situation.
Thank you so much, Congressman Crow. And I also want to tell our online viewers also, you can chat in your question. And again, if we did not get a chance to answer your question, please make sure we have your name and email address. The Congressman office will get back with you in touch. Now I'll turn it to Jumbo and Dr. N and question from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Papa. And the first question I will go to the young 17 years old Caleb Nguse. Caleb, can you come in and ask him the question, please?
So with Africa being the continent that will most be impacted by climate change, and projections holding the drought areas in Africa by increasing by at least 54% by the turn of the century, and the US being one of the largest polluters per capita, how do you plan on affecting this? And are you in favor of the Green New Deal? And are you specifically in favor of a carbon tax on industry?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So first off, you have to start this with the proposition. I can't believe it's 2020 and we even have to say this, but climate change is happening, it's real, and it's a real threat to our planet and to our future. So how do we tackle it? We have to be aggressive about it. We have to re-engage in the Paris Climate Accord because, again, leadership matters. You know, you have U.S. emissions that constitute about 7 to 9% of global emissions. So the United States alone is not going to solve it with 7 to 9% of our emissions. You have a lot of the developing world, China and other folks that are emitting vast amounts of carbon. So that's why engaging in the Paris Climate Accord is really important, because this will only be solved as a world. We can't do it alone. Secondly, we need to have programs that are binding. Now, you mentioned the GND. I share many of the aspirations and goals of that deal, but it's a non-binding resolution that doesn't actually have legal binding results. So what the U.S. Congress did was we convened a select committee on the climate crisis last year, and we charged that select committee of conducting a comprehensive assessment of all of the efforts that were needed to combat climate change. And we looked at all the elements of that, from public health to infrastructure to environmental justice to jobs, and they came up with 12 pillars on each of those main elements. And under each of those 12 pillars, they've identified concrete, actionable, and binding legislation that we can take. Many of those are laws that have already been proposed, including several of my bills, like the Save Energy Act. And they released a blueprint for how to address it. And I support that blueprint. And I've also signed on to another resolution called the Thrive Resolution that addresses climate change and focuses on the goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2035, and then, carbon neutral by 2035, and then net zero by 2050, if not sooner. That's also being supported by Vice President Biden and Senator Harris. So I support that goal. So all of that being said, we have to have things that are actionable, and we also have to have things that constitute or that bring to the table American workers. Because we have allowed other folks to make an argument that this is about the environment or jobs, that somehow we need to choose between the two. But what's really going on is, if we want to have a competitive 21st century economy, and if we want to own the economy of the future, and we want the jobs of the future, that means doing the same thing as the things we need to do to address the climate crisis and to go to net zero carbon emissions. Because the jobs of the future are in green and renewable industries, many of them. You look at China, you look at Europe, that's investing hundreds of billions of dollars in wind and solar. And they're not doing it because, the Chinese Communist Party isn't doing it because they have some urgent need to address climate change. They're doing it because they know that's where the jobs are. And we're going to have to decide whether or not those jobs are going to be in Europe, or they're going to be in China, or they're going to be in Brighton and Aurora and Littleton and Centennial. I'd rather them be here, because that's what our kids and our grandkids are going to be doing. So we have to make those investments. We have to make them now. We have to make them aggressively so that we can have a strong economy, we can have the jobs of the future, and we can save the planet at the same time.
The next questioner, our young leader, Daniel Waldo.
Thank you, Congressman.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel.
Jason.
Yeah, call me Jason. No, I'm serious. I'm really informal here. You guys know that. Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, we've met several times, and you have suggested that I call you Jason. So, hopefully, you don't take that as
No.
And so we're on a first-name basis. I am Daniel Waldo. I'm a Tigrayan Ethiopian American. I say that specifically because I represent the Tigrayan community in Colorado on an official basis. And so the questions that I'll ask today would be catered more around the Tigrayan Ethiopian Americans of District 6. The first question I want to ask you is, there have been many conversations about the stimulus package being to the average Joe of America, and a lot of back and forth is going on. In your views, what are some actions that you're taking or you will be taking as you're running for to be the congressman of District 6? And then what kind of assurance can you give the Tigrayan Ethiopian Americans here in District 6? That's my first question. The second question is going to be taking it back to our native country. At this particular junction, like many ethnic groups in Ethiopia, the Tigrayans of Ethiopia face many, many challenges, from internal displacement from different parts of the country to prosecutions individually and many other horrific acts around the country. And including the government and most other medias, either are advocating for genocide or they are inflicting much of what's happening internally. And it can lead to an actual civil war within the different ethnic groups in Ethiopia. With that in mind, if you see things escalating to the conditions of like Rwanda in the 90s, and then some of the things that we've seen in Sudan in the early 2000s, what kind of actions would you be taking in order to address some of those issues as America, the United States being one of the main allies to Ethiopia as a whole? And those are the two questions that I have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Daniel. So I'll address them in order, starting with, and you can correct me if I misunderstood the question, but you're asking about stimulus, the stimulus bill and what actions I've taken with regard to the stimulus?
Yeah, so there are some conversations, there have been some conversations, at least from what I've read, where stimulus checks would be going out to regular Americans, like the $1,200 that was distributed early on. And many of our community members are out of work. As you know, some of them face being evicted from their homes, from their apartments, or losing even their homes. These are the crises most of our community members face as we speak. And to address that challenge, is there any conversations, any actions that you're taking personally to, and in your colleagues to address that issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, in terms of concrete actions, I've voted twice for another round of stimulus. So the history here is we've passed 4 stimulus bills that have become law, that have done things from small business support, PPP, to disaster loan, to testing, the contact tracing, but also the direct economic payments and expansion of unemployment benefits. That was the CARES Act, as you might remember, from earlier this year. Those 4 have now kind of gone through the system, and now we're facing a huge crisis because businesses are still going bankrupt, people are losing their homes, running out of money, many businesses haven't opened back up, unemployment rate is very high, and I know you know this. So I voted for the HEROES Act, which would have been the 5th round of stimulus, on May 15th of this year. That went and just sat in the Senate, where Mitch McConnell said, let's just see what happens over the next couple of months. Our response was, what do you have to see? There's a huge crisis here. We know what's going to happen, and it's not going to look good. So now 2 weeks ago, we came back and said, all right, if you guys aren't going to pass a bill, meaning the Senate, and you don't want to come and negotiate, we're going to pass another bill, but we're going to lower the price. We're going to lower it. We're going to say, as a sign of good faith, we're going to lower the price tag, and we're going to amend the HEROES Act. We call it HEROES Act 2.0, and we're going to pass that, and then we can negotiate that. We passed that 2 weeks ago, and now they're sitting on it again. Now, where we are now is the president is changing his mind every day. One day he says that we want to negotiate. The other day he says no, then yes, then no, then yes, then no. And he goes back and forth every day whether or not he wants to negotiate a compromise or not. They just have to come to the table because the House can't, we passed our bill. We can't make a law by ourselves. We need the demonstration. They have to decide whether or not they're going to come and talk to us and negotiate a compromise here. And I hope that they will, because this is a massive crisis going on. So that's where we are. I've now voted twice to pass the HEROES Act, or HEROES Act, the first one and the second one. And I continue to push really hard to make it very clear that we have to have a compromise solution, and we have to have it soon, before Election Day, because people can't wait any longer. And if we wait until after the election, there may not be an incentive by the President and the Senate to pass another bill. And America can't wait until February. So time is of the essence here. With regard to Ethiopia, I'm gravely concerned for the situation. I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of folks. First off, I just condemn violence in all of its forms, all the time. There should not be, the political violence, the ethnic violence that we've seen for too long in Ethiopia is obviously not good for Ethiopia. It's not good for the world. It's not good for our community. So I do want to see the U.S. step up and assume a leadership role in helping broker this. I think it has to be an Ethiopian solution. Right? The United States can't come in and dictate terms because that never really works out well. But we can support, we can be an honest broker, and we can bring the sides together to find a resolution. But we have to make that decision, and we have to say that we are going to assume some leadership role and engage, and that engagement is necessary because, by the time, and you use the example of Rwanda, we don't want it to even get close to that, right? We want to stop it early, and I know it's moving fast, right? The reports are very troubling to me. So we have to make sure that we're engaging, and we're engaging quickly and supporting a peaceful reconciliation so that we can keep Ethiopia as one.
My name is Ibrahim. On behalf of the Afro-Arab newspaper. In respect of time, because you have to go, I think. That's what I heard. So I'll try to short it. It's about Sudan and the new transformation and the position of the democratic forces, whom they really did a great job in Sudan in removing dictatorship, which is Islam's wrong slogans was in Sudan. Now we have a democratic government, we have a democratic leadership. But we have two things. We have one, the terrorist list. I know the State Department are working on it, but it's not, you don't represent them, so you represent the Democratic Party. We are not happy, historically, with some of Democratic. We are not happy of what the Democratic government did during South Sudan problem and Eritrea and Ethiopian conflict. But still we are hope because you and Joe Ngusi, you are the new leadership representing us in the Congress. And both of you, you are young, you are so close to our community. I would like to invite the Sudanese community leadership to meet you and to discuss about issues serious about Sudan. So I will not ask you more than follow up whenever have a chance with your staff to organize that meeting. Thank you very much.
That's an easy one, yes. I mean, my door is always open, as you know, so happy to meet with you all.
We have time. All right. So again, if we did not get to your question, please we'll send it to the Congressman's office. They will get back to you. Now, Congressman, thank you so much. And we meant talk about so many relevant topics here. And we're just grateful to have you as a friend in our community. And it means a lot. And what I want to say is, you've been in the community when you were asking for our vote. You came back and you kept coming after you got our vote. So we want to thank you for that. So this time I would like to give you the floor for closing remark, but just want to thank you, but closing remark to the community. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Papa. Hopefully I didn't talk too much, but I get excited when I talk about these issues. So thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you to all of you for inviting me and for putting this forum together. We are in a very challenging, difficult time in our nation, in our community. We're very divided, right? We see families divided, we see friends divided, co-workers, neighbors, people fighting each other over politics. And I think we've learned that the tone that's set at the top matters, that it matters what our leaders say and how they act. But no one person got us into these challenges, and no one person will get us out. So I believe in this idea that many of you have heard me talk about called servant leadership. And actually, Jesus talked about it in the book of Matthew, that he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that those who want to lead amongst you must first be your servant. And then Martin Luther King and others have talked about it and preached about it. But the essence of it is that leadership should be bottom up, right? It's not a top-down process. It's not a process where we try to find the smartest man or woman in the room that has all the answers, and they just tell you how things are going to be, right? That's not democracy, and that's not how you get the best result. You get the best result by bringing people together and having candid and difficult conversations. But that requires confidence to come together and say, we're not always going to agree. There will be times where we disagree, but that's okay. Because we want to have an honest conversation, we want to come together, and we need to try to find the solutions to very tough problems together. Because that is how you get the best result. And that, my friends, is what is at stake in this election. Because there's two very different visions of society and leadership on the ballot right now. Two very different approaches to how we're going to solve the biggest challenges of our time. And yes, specific policies like gun violence and climate change and immigration reform and health care and the pandemic crisis and public education, all of those issues are on the ballot. And they all matter. But more than anything, this is a character election, this is an integrity election, and it's a leadership election. And who has the integrity and the character to say, I don't have all the answers? Because these are tough, tough problems that we're facing. But I will show up. I will always be honest with you. You're always going to know where I stand. There should be no question in anyone's mind where I stand on any issue, because I represent you. You deserve to know. And I'll keep an open mind. I'll be respectful of everybody, because I represent everybody, whether we agree or not. And together, we will have the discussion that our country is designed to have to try to find the best solution for all of us. That's my approach. And that's my promise. I'm always going to show up. I'm always going to listen. I'm always going to be respectful. And you're always going to know where I stand. And we'll have the conversation. And guess what? I'll change my mind if you make a great case. Right? Because I don't have all the solutions. But that's what I will always deliver to you. And I will continue to fight for health care and public education and gun violence and racial justice. But more so is we will work on this together, because that's who I am. And I appreciate the opportunity. And I humbly ask you all again for your support so that we can together move forward, heal the divisions within our country and community, learn to have the discussions again, and start tackling some of these really big challenges. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Thank you. And now we are getting to our closing remark from Abi, that's representing the community. Abi, please welcome on stage.
want to thank you guys all for being here again. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jason Crow, and earlier Steve House, for joining us and sharing with us your ideas and your thoughts. On behalf of the Ethiopian American Civic Council, African Leadership Group, ISAT, Colorado Ethiopian Community, and the Eritrean community, we would like to thank the Hyatt Regency Hotel for hosting this event. We would like to also thank our amazing supporters, Jumbo Motors, Lucy Coffee, and Qual Image for supporting this forum. We could not have done this without you. Thank you to all you community members, all those who gave your thoughts, who pushed back, who showed that this election, we have a stake in it, we have a voice, and we have our interests that we want to make sure are represented in this election. So thank you all for coming and for showing your support tonight. Last and not least, I want to encourage you guys all to vote. Let's take what we've learned, let's take what we've heard, and let's share it with our community members, with those who are not able to be here today. Let's have these conversations at the dinner table. Let's talk about it issue by issue. And there's different elections at stake. And so let's talk about those all one by one. And when you go to vote, take a friend with you. Let's get there as a group. Let's talk together, and let's do this as a community. Thank you all for being here. We're going to take a second and take some group pictures. Let's keep our masks on and practice social distancing as best we can. And you all have a good night.